Hello, my loves, and welcome to Strange Playgrounds, or Our Lives in Horror, depending on where and when you're listening to this. Of late, I've been revisiting some of my favorite shows and comedies from when I was a teenager, from the 1990s, the mid to late 1990s. And there's one in particular that I've always had an enormous soft spot for. Alongside, we'll talk about this particular show a little later, maybe with a guest. I know that friend of the channel, Jonathan Butcher, has wanted to talk about this for a long time, but the show Jam. If you've never seen Jam, go and look that up. There's only 6 episodes, but it is, for my money, Jam is apex comedy. It's the high watermark. It is so brilliant, so disturbing, so bizarre. It's the kind of comedy that it foregoes any assumptions of what comedy is. It doesn't have like setups and punchlines or anything like that. It doesn't work like that. It makes you laugh and smile because you are unsettled by what's going on. It's so strange. It's so deviant. Utterly, I mean, just genius level stuff. Jam is just, it's beautiful. It's actually artistic. I mean, it is funny, but it's also powerfully distressing, weird, bordering on the dataistic, or the data-esque. It's so strange. And I don't think there has ever been anything quite like it. For me, it is the high watermark of British comedy. I can't think of anything that even comes close to Jam other than its contemporaries, like the radio show Blue Jam that it was based on. But the one I want to speak about today is The League of Gentlemen. The League of Gentlemen, for those of you who've never seen The League of Gentlemen, it is this very deviant, transgressive comedy from the mid to late 1990s, which mixes elements of drama and horror and just gross out weirdness with comedy. In many ways, the various sketches that make up the League of Gentlemen are kind of classic in terms of their structure. So it is set up, joke, set up, joke, set up, joke. But the way it's put together is absolute genius. As I say, there is narrative here for one thing. Each of the sketches has its own little internal story that feeds into a wider story over the first 2 seasons, and which has a climax at the very end. It's pretty much genius. What makes it so notable is the way it tap dances on that border between comedy and horror. The influences on the League of Gentlemen are as profoundly from horror as they are from comedy. And even the comedy itself has a kind of grotesque horror to it. But what makes the League of Gentlemen so utterly brilliant is that although the characters are exaggerated and distorted, they are eminently recognizable. So they're archetypes that almost every British person, certainly who was around in the 1990s, will recognize. You will know couples like Charlie and Stella, for example, they're a couple who have been together forever but hate one another. Absolutely loathe one another, but can't be apart. They can't function independently. So all they do is passive aggressively carp and snipe at one another. That's that sketch. That's what it is. They are in absolute despair, but they can't do anything about it. And what makes it funny is that association. It's that recognizable element. Of course, being a comedy, this takes it to absolute extremes. But the things they do and the way they act are so sincere. Reece Shearsmith's plays Stella. Almost all of the women, by the way, all of the characters, all of the principal characters are played by the three main cast members: Steve Pemberton, Reece Shearsmith, and Mark Gatiss. All of the characters, including the women characters, and they are absolutely brilliant. I mean, Reece Shearsmith as Stella is so convincing. The mannerisms, the little quirks, the little characteristics that he invests that character with and the sincerity of it, that's also part of the genius of this. Although the characters are comedically exaggerated, they're played with such sincerity, such incredible conviction. So within Charlie and Stella sketches, there's pathos, there's drama. You kind of want them to be okay, even though you know they never are. Um, Iris and Mrs. Levinson, that it's so fucking brilliant. Mrs. Levinson, who is this sort of upwardly mobile, upper middle boomer woman who has gotten rich via marriage. She reportedly married this absentee character called Eddie, who's never around. You never see who Eddie is. She only refers to him. He's always purportedly at work doing this or that. And she, she lives on a nice estate and she's very materialist. She wears fashionable clothes. She will only eat things from Marks and Spencers and so on and so forth. And her cleaning lady, Iris, who's from a council estate, from a sort of sink estate, is underclass, has multiple children by multiple different parents, and the whole dynamic of their sketch is the way they're engaged in this passive aggressive carping and uh, sort of bitchy backbiting between one another, but they never get direct about it. They only ever refer to things. And through those little interactions, you find out this entire backstory about both of them. Like, for example, the fact that Mrs. Levinson, her husband Eddie, is dead and has been dead for ages. All the holidays that she purports to go on, these foreign holidays, she doesn't. She's more or less housebound. She can't function on her own. The fact that her daughter has terrible, terrible mental health problems, all of this comes out within the sketch as it evolves, and you have to kind of infer it. It's really brilliant. It's beautifully constructed. It's its own little drama within the comedy, and it's also very, very funny because again, you know these women. Every single one of us has known these women in one way, shape, or form. It's utterly brilliant. Then you get the more exaggerated characters, the distorted ones, the classic ones are the ones that everyone quotes. Like this is the kind of comedy where when it aired, the next morning everyone at school was quoting it because it's so quotable. Everyone was doing Tubbs and Edward. Hello, hello, what's going on? What's all this shouting? We'll have no trouble here. Tubbs and Edward, who own the local shop, which is like out on the moors of Royston. The town in which it's set is called Royston Vasey, which is a fictional town. Royston Vasey is actually Roy Chubby Brown's real name, who is this awful, awful British comedian from, decades of yore. Um, they own this little shop that operates on the moors, but it's like the Wicker Man. That's part of the influence on the Tubbs and Edwards sketches. They don't engage with anyone else. They're like isolated in their own weird little pagan culture, and they're strange and they're bizarre, and they don't like strangers coming into their shop. And when they do, they engage in the most bizarre interactions with them and ultimately end up doing terrible, terrible things to them. It's utterly brilliant. They're grotesque, they are very strange, and what's so great about it is you never know what they're going to do. Tubbs and Edward, in particular, are wholly unpredictable. You never really know where the interactions are going to go. You just know they're going to kick off big style. Like, Edward takes offense at everything, absolutely everything. Anyone who wanders into the shop, he takes immediate offense to them and builds these entire elaborate backstories about them, which he then accuses them of. It's just the most amazing thing. You need to see it really to get what it's like. It's so strange. It's so weird. My personal favorite sketch of the entire thing, Pauline. Pauline at the job center. Pauline's Pens, she's a restart officer. She works at the local job center with unemployed people, and her job ostensibly is to get them back on their feet, to do restart courses. But she's horrible. She's psychotic. She's evil. She treats them like, well, as she calls them, scum. She is so vicious, so vile, so nasty, and it's utterly brilliant. Again, it's Steve Pemberton who plays Pauline, and what you see when you see that performance, you do not see a man in drag. You see a woman, and it is utterly brilliant. The mannerisms, the physical qualities that they bring to these characters are amazing. Also, Pauline is very fucking funny. I mean, some of the sketches involving Pauline are my favorites. They are so foul. I mean, watching them, I don't know how they got away with them on the BBC. I mean, Pauline actually gets away with saying some of the words that were banned on the BBC at the time, and that's really impressive. That's really impressive. Piled on top of that, like the more recognizable characters, you have these weird subplots happening that underlie the whole thing. So you've got Hilary Briss, who's the local butcher. Again, a very recognizable archetype. But Hilary Briss has a dark secret. He sells what he calls special stuff from underneath the counter, and you never know exactly what it is. I mean, the guys, the team, the League of Gentlemen have said themselves, it's nothing so banal as like human meat or anything like that. That's like small potatoes compared to what the special stuff is. But there's an entire arc involving the special stuff and the way people become addicted to it and the way Hilary Briss uses it to influence figures around the town. The writing is really good, particularly in the first two seasons where everything intermeshes, everything flows together. Bernice, the local vicar, who has a quotes by Nietzsche on the board outside her church, she is a cynical materialist monster, an absolute monster, and so funny, so funny. Oh, the Dentons, who are a local family who are obsessed with order and cleanliness. Again, they have little ticks and quirks that you will recognize from obsessive compulsive households. If you've ever been to someone's house who is, obsessed with these little rules, these petty little like rituals and routines that they have that they abide by religiously, that's the Dentons. And here it's taken to ridiculous extremes. Another horror reference here, The Shining. They have twins who are directly out of The Shining. It's just utterly brilliant. There is a very definite idea of what Royston Vasey is like. It is familiar things that are either distorted, ramped up, so that their innate weirdness is brought to the fore, or lampooned massively. It is genius. It is utter genius. Now, of course, this is a sketch show from the 1990s, so there are some sketches which are massively out of date now that don't really fly anymore. There is a very famous sketch which is Babs Cabs. Babs Cabs, a very recognizable character from around Royston Vasey. Barbara Babs is a trans woman. Now, you have to bear in mind, this was in the mid 1990s. Most of British culture had no idea of what a trans person was. They had no concept outside of of sketches like this, unfortunately. So Babs is a joke. The whole joke is that she's trans, and that's it. That is largely it. And of course, it's not particularly in date anymore. It doesn't really fly anymore. However, rewatching it recently, it's really fascinating because the show itself doesn't treat her particularly well, but the characters do. All of the characters in Royston Vasey who take her taxi use her preferred pronouns, talk to her as a woman, and that's amazing, isn't it? And it's not a big deal. It's just not a big deal. Nobody really cares. It's not a big deal at all. It's just part of who she is. And in fact, she has one of the bigger story arcs in the show. She's part of the big story arc that overrides everything. It's kind of interesting in that regard. It is a marker of the times, and there is a bit of that in it actually. You need to watch. There are some like racial stereotypes that don't fly. There are some sketches that are profoundly out of date, and But I will say this, Babs may have been a lot of people's first exposure to a trans character on British television at all, because it was still so taboo back then. I mean, even queer characters were taboo at that point. So yeah, it's quite incredible. It's quite incredible. Um, and it's, I mean, for me, The League of Gentlemen, alongside the likes of Jam, is apex comedy. It's so damn funny. It's so damn funny, but it makes you laugh because it's uncomfortable, because you know who these characters are. They're members of your own family, they're members of your friend circle, you know them from your jobs, just from wandering around in Britain. It takes the innate weirdness and eccentricities and grotesquerie of what it is to be British and just amps them up. It puts them on the screen in a very dark way. It doesn't apologize for them. It doesn't make them cute either, like a lot of shows do. Like, for example, like, Only Fools and Horses, which I can't. Sorry, guys. I know everyone in Britain loves it. I can't fucking stand it. I cannot fucking stand it. Um, this does it without sentiment. In fact, it does it in a really stark and quite nasty way in many respects. It's wonderful. It is one of my favorite comedies ever made, I've got to say. It was resurrected for a third season in I think, the early 2000s, and a lot of people don't like the third season of The League of Gentlemen, and it is not as successful as the first two, that's for damn sure. But having rewatched it recently, I really appreciate it. It's a different project. It was a number of years after the second season, and clearly they wanted to do something different with it. Things had changed, so they create this interwoven story which features around lots of individual characters following their own paths and then intersecting at a particular point. And there are a lot of the characters that were not that popular in the first season, that people don't remember, that weren't quoted in the schoolyard. And I appreciate that too. That was kind of a brave writing decision, to go with characters that were not as impressive, like poor Alvin, who runs the B&B in Royston Vasey, who is the most boring man alive. I mean, the most boring man alive. He finds the oddest things not arousing, that would be the wrong word, because he's not the kind of man who gets aroused. He's just boring. He's dull, dull, dull. But he's married to a woman who is obsessed with expanding the horizons of her sexuality. And so there are always like these really hardcore weird orgies going on at the B&B, which Alvin hates and cannot take part in, just cannot engage with. There's a whole story arc in season 3 where he's having an affair with an equally boring woman who works at the local gardening center, and it really works. It's a very good story. Jeff Tips, Jeff Tips, who again, a guy we all know, who is he's his own worst enemy, and he can't see it. He does have very bad luck. Does Jeff Tips? There's no doubt about it. He has such bad luck, but he's also his own worst enemy. He can't control his own emotions. He's emotionally stunted. He has this incredible inferiority complex, lies to everyone because of it to protect his own ego. Brilliant character, absolutely brilliant character. And he gets a resolution in season 3 as well, which is actually kind of nice. It's one of the few instances where a character in Royston Vasey gets a halfway decent ending. It's kind of sweet. It's kind of sweet. And it also came back more recently. There was a Brexit special, basically a Brexit special three-parter. And I was deathly afraid of that, to be perfectly honest. Normally, when this happens, when a show from the 1990s is resurrected for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. But in the context of Brexit and what that had brought out of the UK in terms of self-reflection, it really worked. It really worked. I rewatched it alongside the other seasons quite recently, And there's a lot of poignant observations in it. Part of the whole thing with Tubbs and Edward, who own the local shop, is that they hate outsiders. They hate anyone who is not local. The quote is, "This is a local shop for local people. There's nothing for you here." And they became the face of Brexit in Royston Vasey inadvertently. It's really fucking brilliant. It's really clever. And it is very, very funny. Very funny. As grotesque as it's always been. And it also has some very dark turns for some of the characters as well. Speaking of dark turns, possibly my favorite installment in the entire franchise is the Christmas special. I think it was after season 2, they did a Christmas special, and if the previous 2 seasons edged towards horror, the Christmas special tips right over into it deliberately. It's a series of the way it's structured is beautiful. You've got Bernice, who's the vicar, being really awful and cynical about Christmas, obviously, because she's awful and cynical about everything. And she's visited by several residents of Royston Vasey who tell her stories about their life. And each one is weird and dark and involves like supernatural stuff and weirdness. One of them is heavily based on M.R. James, which was probably Mark Gatiss's influence. Utterly brilliant. They are not only very funny, but they're actually genuinely dark. These stories, there's some real horror in them. I mean, real horror going on. But brilliant, absolutely wonderful. If you haven't seen The League of Gentlemen, check it out. It is on the BBC iPlayer at the moment. Obviously a content warning. It's from the 1990s. There's some stuff in it that maybe doesn't fly anymore, that is a little offensive. Um, but for the most part, The League of Gentlemen is a stunning comedy. It's so beautifully written, and barring Jam, I struggle to think of anything that's gotten to its level, that's at its level in terms of writing, in terms of invention, in terms of transgressiveness, pushing the envelope of horror, of comedy to its edge, and then sometimes beyond. It's very, very good indeed. And the fact that these three guys play almost all of the characters, it's utterly brilliant. They've got such a repertoire between them, such a repertoire. Of course, since then they've gone on to greater things. Mark Gatiss writes for Doctor Who and lots of other things. Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith, Inside Number Nine. I mean, my God, you know what I think of Inside Number Nine. It's one of the most brilliant shows the BBC have ever done. So yeah, it's been really interesting revisiting it actually, because for me it is not only is it a brilliant comedy, it's also heavily nostalgic. It's the kind of thing I was quietly obsessive about when I was in my teenage years. Loved it to bits when I was a teenager, and still do, still do. It does still take me back to that period in the 1990s when there was a lot of really crazy, transgressive, inventive comedy in the UK. And I kind of miss it. I will admit, I kind of miss that.